Have you ever walked into a room and instantly, like without a single word being spoken, just absorbed the entire emotional weight and unspoken tension of the people inside?
Yeah, that heavy, thick feeling in the air.
Exactly. That inescapable, overwhelming receptivity, well, that is the exact psychological reality of Shravana manifesting on Earth.
It really is. And it's a profound and often incredibly heavy reality to live with for these individuals.
I can imagine.
Because when you possess that kind of psychic architecture, you aren't just observing the environment.
Yeah.
You know, you're physically taking it on.
Yeah.
The boundary between you and the room effectively vanishes.
It just dissolves. And, as we settle in here at Cafe Karma with the quiet hiss of the espresso machine in the background and the steady rhythm of rain against the window, it really feels like the perfect atmosphere to just sit with that heaviness.
A very Shravana kind of day, actually.
Yeah.
Very contemplative.
It is, to give it the time and space it demands. So drawing from ancient Vedic astrological texts, our mission for this deep dive is to explore exactly this, the earthly and psychological manifestation of the Shravana Nakshatra.
Right.
We really want to understand how this star of listening fundamentally shapes a person's mind, their career, their physical body, and ultimately their entire existential path.
Which means we have to look past the abstract mythology.
Yeah.
Because the capacity to absorb a room's energy, it isn't some, mystical parlor trick.
Right, it's not magic.
Exactly. It is the result of a very specific, mechanical, and frankly agonizing planetary dynamic. We have to look at the psychological friction that actually builds this kind of mind.
So let's look at the machinery of that friction. Because if you are listening to this and you happen to have a strong Shravana placement, you probably know this feeling of being entirely overwhelmed by a room.
Oh, absolutely. They live it every day.
But what is actually happening in the planetary blueprint to cause that?
Well, it comes down to a fundamental, irreconcilable clash between two wildly different planetary energies. So Shravana is entirely ruled by the moon.
Okay.
Now, in the Vedic system, the moon is the mind, the emotions, the maternal nurturing instinct. It represents extreme, fluctuating sensitivity. It is pure, unshielded receptivity to whatever is around it.
It's water. It just takes the shape of whatever container you pour it into.
A perfect way to put it. Yeah, it's water.
Yeah.
But here is the catch. This holy, lunar, receptive nakshatra sits entirely within the zodiac sign of Capricorn.
Oh, right.
And Capricorn is the domain of Saturn. So Saturn is the absolute antithesis of the moon.
The complete opposite.
Right. Saturn represents cold rigidity, structural limitation, harsh karma, and restriction.
So you have the raw, vulnerable, absorbent nature of the moon trapped inside the dense, uncompromising boundaries of Saturn.
Precisely.
It is like taking a highly sensitive, state-of-the-art microphone that picks up a pin drop from a mile away and encasing it entirely in thick, heavy concrete.
That is the exact setup. I mean, that perfectly describes it. And it creates what we call the sponge effect.
The sponge effect.
Yeah, because even inside that concrete block, the microphone is still on. So if you are a Shravana native, you are hyper-attuned to the world. You pick up on microscopic clues.
Like what kind of clues?
A colleague's slight shift in posture during a meeting, or a microscopic tightening in someone's jaw, a tiny tremor in a friend's vocal tone. You soak up all that unspoken anxiety and tension like a sponge.
Wow. But because of that thick concrete of Saturn, you can't easily express what you are picking up.
Exactly. The data comes in, but the outgoing signal is blocked.
You can't just blurt out like, hey, I sense you're secretly furious right now. You are trapped with all that data.
And holding all that unexpressed data creates a very specific, painful psychological state known as behumility.
Behumility.
Yes. It is a profound internal tension. On the inside, these individuals possess a quiet arrogance or sort of false humility. Deep down, they know they are highly intelligent.
Right, because they see everything.
Exactly. They are painfully aware that they see and hear dynamics that everyone else in the room is completely oblivious to.
They basically have the cheat sheet to human interaction.
They do, but the social inhibition and the immense crushing weight of Saturn prevent them from expressing that intelligence fluidly.
Saturn holds them back.
Yeah, Saturn restricts the ego from showing off. So they sit there possessing this vast repository of insight, but appearing quiet, reserved, or even unremarkable to the outside world.
That sounds excruciating. I mean, if you are constantly sitting in a corporate boardroom or a family dinner, absorbing everyone's neuroses but physically unable to release the valve and speak on it.
It's exhausting for them.
How does someone survive being an emotional sponge without losing their own identity? Because my issue with the sponge analogy is that a sponge doesn't have a choice in what it absorbs.
All right.
Are these native completely devoid of agency, or is there a way to wring the sponge out?
Well, the difficult truth is, without conscious intervention, they often do lose their identity. Yeah. This constant dissolution of boundaries, where they can no longer tell if a feeling of dread actually belongs to them or to the person sitting across from them, it takes a massive toll.
That sounds like a recipe for depression.
It is. It leads directly to a strong tendency towards deep melancholy. So, to wring the sponge out, they are forced into periods of intense seclusion.
They have to physically remove themselves from the noise to remember who they actually are.
Yes, they live by the motto, seclusion is the price of greatness.
Seclusion is the price of greatness. Wow.
They have to withdraw. Sometimes they ruthlessly cut themselves off from social interaction just to protect their overloaded circuits. They need the silence to separate their own authentic voice from the ambient noise of the crowd.
And if they don't?
If they don't retreat to drain the sponge, the psychological weight simply becomes paralyzing.
Which brings up a fascinating dilemma about the nature of this absorption. Because if a sponge is designed by the cosmos to absorb absolutely everything it touches, it doesn't discriminate.
Right, it takes it all in.
So what happens when it is dropped into a bucket of dirty water?
Then it becomes heavy, toxic, and useless. And this is where we enter the distinct shadow side of Shravana.
The dark side.
Exactly. Because they possess this profound cosmic hunger for truth and understanding, they treat absolutely everything in their environment as a vital subject of study.
Everything is data.
Everything. Their primary psychological drive is to gather information. It's an appetite that is never satisfied.
But when you lack a higher spiritual focus, or say you are stuck in a toxic work environment, that noble quest for truth mutate pretty quickly.
Oh, it mutates into a compulsion. They can easily fall into behavioral addictions. Specifically, a compulsive addiction to gathering low-value information.
Like what?
Well, they convince themselves they are simply being observant, gathering necessary data on the human condition.
But it turns out you aren't conducting a rigorous sociological study on human behavior. You are literally just eavesdropping on your coworker's gossip by the water cooler.
Yes, exactly that. That water cooler gossip is the ultimate trap for this placement.
Really? Just gossip.
It is a misdirected quest for information. The cosmic hunger for truth mutates into a cheap sugar rush. They waste their immense intellectual potential, that state-of-the-art microphone, on vibrational noise.
And because they're so phenomenally sensitive, taking in that negativity, like the petty grievances, the backbiting, the complaining, it has to damage their internal wiring.
It does.
They aren't just hearing it, they are internalizing the poison.
It completely shatters their emotional equilibrium. And the irony is, Shravana natives are incredibly sensitive to criticism themselves.
Oh, of course.
They desperately want people to speak well of them, but when they engage in gossip or even just silently listen to it without walking away, they become entangled in that low frequency.
They get dragged down.
Yeah. Furthermore, because of this exact dynamic, they are highly prone to making secret enemies.
Wait, why secret enemies? If they're just quietly listening, why would people turn against them?
Because people aren't stupid. On a subconscious level, others can sense that the Shravana native is observing them.
Oh, right. The intense staring.
Yeah, cataloging their flaws, analyzing their microexpressions, even if the native never says a single word. That silent, intense scrutiny makes people feel exposed and deeply uncomfortable.
It's unsettling.
Very. It breeds resentment from the outside in.
So you have this highly tuned, incredibly absorbent mind, constantly wrestling with the restriction of Saturn, absorbing the world, risking toxicity. But if every single Shravana native is trapped in this Saturnian concrete, shouldn't they all just be paralyzed by depression?
You think so?
Right. Why do some become aggressive CEOs while others become quiet monks? There has to be an internal sorting mechanism that dictates how they actually use this data.
There is, and it's a critical layer of Vedic astrology. So the overarching nakshatra spans 13 degrees and 20 minutes of the zodiac.
Okay.
But it is divided into 4 equal parts, or padas. When we look at the Navamsa, which you can think of as the chart of the soul's undercurrent, or the microscopic breakdown of a sign, we see each of these 4 padas falls under a different planetary influence.
And that changes the output.
It drastically changes how that core Shravana energy is expressed in the real world.
I see. So think of the Pada as like 4 different department managers in a company receiving the exact same raw data report, but executing it completely differently based on their
A
personalities.
brilliant way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's look at the first manager, Pada 1.
Okay, Pada 1.
This quarter falls into the Aries Navamsa, which is ruled by Mars. So you inject Martian fire into this cold, receptive moon and Saturn structure.
Mars introduces fire to the moon's water. When that water boils up against Saturn's concrete walls, it creates immense psychological steam and pressure.
That is perfectly said. The pressure translates directly into aggressive ambition. The focus here is on drive. We can call this the driven Pada.
The driven Pada.
Yeah. The psychological structure becomes highly logical, focused, and proactive. They meet challenges head-on.
So they aren't just sitting there.
No, they don't just passively absorb a room. They use their intense listening skills to gather tactical intelligence, figure out the power dynamics, and conquer the situation.
So the microphone is being used for corporate espionage or strategic dominance.
Exactly.
If that is the Mars-driven manager, how on earth does the second manager, who is Venus-driven, survive the same raw data without burning out?
Well, Peta 2 falls into the Taurus Navamsa, ruled by Venus. The focus here shifts entirely away from conquest and toward eloquence and tradition. We call this the eloquent leader, Peta.
Eloquent leader.
Right. Venus softens the Saturnian harshness. It creates diplomats. They are steadfast, reliable, and possess incredibly penetrating voices.
Oh, so they use their receptivity to harmonize rather than to dominate.
Exactly. They use their listening to become preservers of cultural or family heritage. They want to see the material, beautiful manifestation of their ideas.
That makes sense for Taurus.
Right. They're the ones who listen to the wisdom of the past and build lasting institutions to protect it.
It's a much more grounded way to process the data. Then we get to the third manager, Pada 3. And this feels like a totally different operational style.
Very different. So Pada 3 falls into the Gemini Navamsa, ruled by Mercury.
Okay, Mercury.
Mercury governs the intellect, agility, and communication. Here, the focus is strictly on words. This is the intellectual Peta. These minds are highly flexible, incredibly cunning, and very social.
Like puzzle solvers.
Yes, they are masters of language, linguistics, and even secret codes.
But wait, if Mercury loves communication and the exchange of ideas, wouldn't this specific Peta be the most vulnerable to that gossip trap we talked about earlier?
Highly vulnerable. Because Mercury is endlessly curious, this native uses their listening skills to constantly decode the world around them.
Always digging.
Yeah, looking for the hidden meaning behind every interaction. If they aren't careful, that turns into an obsession with everyone else's secrets.
Fascinating. And the final manager, Pada 4.
Pada 4 falls into the Cancer Navamsa, which is ruled by the moon itself. So here you have the moon ruling the nakshatra and the moon ruling the microscopic subdivision.
Double moon.
Exactly. It is the sympathetic Pada. The focus here is on profound sympathy and spiritual teaching. They're the most receptive, deeply feeling quarter of them all.
They get a double dose of that extreme sensitivity.
They do. They are massively attuned to the collective consciousness, practically feeling the heartbeat of the masses.
Wow.
Their drive isn't to conquer, preserve material wealth, or decode secrets. It is to understand internal spirituality and to use that deep, empathetic listening to teach and guide tomorrow's leaders.
So, depending on the Pada, this highly tuned, absorbent, structured mind is filtering the world in uniquely different ways.
Exactly.
But that raises a very practical question. If you are a Shravana native sitting out there right now, how do you actually make a living in the earthly realm?
Right. How do you pay the bills?
Yeah. How do you monetize being a restricted sponge, regardless of which internal manager is running the show?
To understand their earthly professions, we have to look back at the presiding deity of Shravana, which is Lord Vishnu.
Okay.
In the ancient texts, Vishnu is the preserver. His cosmic role is to maintain the order of the universe.
The sustainer.
Exactly. Therefore, the psychological architecture of a Shravana native is not that of an initiator. They aren't the ones who aggressively build things from absolute scratch or recklessly tear down old systems. They are the ultimate sustainers and maintainers of systems.
Which is such a vital distinction. I feel like our modern world obsessively glorifies the initiator or the disruptor.
Oh, absolutely.
We write endless books celebrating the maverick who breaks the mold, the tech CEO who moves fast and breaks things. But society would utterly collapse without the Shravana sustainer who actually keeps the machinery running and preserves the institutional knowledge.
That is so true. Disruption without preservation is just chaos.
Right.
Shravana natives provide the connective tissue that holds the human experience together. Because they are ruled by the moon's receptivity and Saturn's structure, their specific professions revolve around reception, preservation, and interpretation.
So what are some examples?
Well, the sources highlight careers like linguists, speech therapists, counselors, and psychiatrists.
Because they have that hyper-attuned listening. I mean, a psychiatrist doesn't build a new brain for you. A psychiatrist literally heals by listening to what is said and, more importantly, interpreting what is left unsaid in the silence.
Beautifully put. They sustain the mind. They are also drawn to being historians, archaeologists, organizers, and preservers of tradition.
Keeping the past alive.
Yes. They want to ensure that knowledge, order, and history are sustained for the next generation. They are the guardians of the archives, both literal and metaphorical.
But carrying all that weight, being the sustainer of the system, acting as the guardian of the archives, absorbing the emotional baggage of everyone around you while living with that heavy Saturnian restriction.
It takes a toll.
It has to. The mind cannot carry this much weight without the physical body eventually paying a severe toll.
It is a cardinal rule of medical astrology. The physical body always mirrors the psychological reality.
The body keeps the score.
Exactly. The tension has to manifest somatically. Because of their absolute hyper-attunement to sound and vibration, Shravana natives frequently suffer from ear and hearing problems.
The microphone is quite literally short-circuiting from picking up too much ambient noise.
Exactly that. It can manifest as tinnitus, a constant ringing in the ears, or hyperacusis, which is an extreme painful sensitivity to everyday sounds.
Oh, that sounds awful.
Their acoustic circuits are overloaded. Furthermore, they're highly prone to skin sensitivities.
The skin? Why the skin?
Well, the skin is the physical boundary between the self and the outside world. For a Shravana native, that boundary is always under immense psychological stress, so the skin reacts with rashes or allergies.
And because Shravana sits entirely within the sign of Capricorn, they must absorb the physical vulnerabilities of that sign as well.
Right. So Capricorn rules the skeletal structure, particularly the knees. So we see issues with joint stiffness and rheumatism.
The rigidity of Saturn?
Yes. The Saturnian rigidity of their mind locks up the joints of their body. But perhaps the most deeply symbolic physical affliction mentioned in the text relates to the lower belly and the excretory orifices.
The lower digestive tract. That is such a specific and unglamorous area to highlight. What is the psychosomatic link there?
Think about the fundamental biological function of those organs. They are the body's primary channels for waste removal.
Okay.
Psychologically, the Shravana native absorbs an immense amount of emotional waste from their environment every single day. The anger, the grief, the petty frustrations of everyone they encounter.
So if they don't retreat into that seclusion we talked about, if they don't wring the sponge out and process that psychic toxicity, the body mimics the mind's blockage.
Yes. The physical body creates a literal mirror of the psychological state. It leads directly to issues with elimination and the lower digestive tract. They literally cannot let go of the toxic waste they've absorbed, so the body refuses to let go of physical waste.
That is a staggering connection. The idea that your digestive issues might actually be rooted in your inability to stop absorbing your coworkers' anxiety.
It's all connected.
But there is one more physical, or rather mythological metaphor mentioned in the sources that I want to ensure we cover. It ties everything together, the concept of the limp.
Ah, yes. The metaphor of the lame, or the limping. The very word Shravana has an alternative translation in the ancient texts, which is the one who limps.
The one who limps.
Yes. This is deeply tied to its central mythology regarding the Vamana avatar.
The story where Lord Vishnu incarnates as a dwarf?
Right. Vishnu appeared as Vamana, a small, unassuming dwarf, to request land from a proud, arrogant king.
Okay.
The dwarf asked only for the amount of land he could cover in 3 simple strides. The king laughed and granted it. But once granted, the dwarf expanded into cosmic proportions. Massively. With his first step, he covered the earth. With his second, the heavens. And with his third, he achieved ultimate, universal victory.
It's a beautiful myth, but how does that cosmic story translate into the earthly reality of a Shravana native walking down the street today?
On a literal physical level, it can sometimes manifest as an asymmetry in the body or a peculiar gait, an actual physical limp connecting back to those knee and joint issues.
Okay.
But the psychological manifestation is far more common and far more profound. It means the native almost always starts life from a perceived disadvantage. They begin their journey with a psychological limp.
They feel the heavy concrete of Saturn before they realize the power of the microphone.
Yes, they feel inferior.
Yeah.
They feel restricted, socially awkward, or burdened by their own overwhelming sensitivity. They look around at a loud, fast-paced world and feel small, quiet, and inadequate, just like the dwarf.
But the entire point of the myth is that the dwarf didn't stay small.
And neither does the Shravana native. That initial limitation, the limp, is an illusion.
An illusion.
They possess the hidden structural capacity to cross extraordinary limits. Through deep empathetic listening, methodical learning, and the immense patience granted by Saturn, they eventually expand their consciousness.
They take those 3 strides.
Exactly. They achieve a kind of universal expansion, crossing intellectual and spiritual boundaries that others cannot even perceive.
It's an incredible trajectory. From being entirely paralyzed by the unspoken noise of a room, trapped in the concrete of their own mind, to eventually stepping across the universe and sustaining the wisdom of society.
It is a remarkable journey.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, sitting here with the rain still tapping steadily against the glass of Cafe Karma, it forces a moment of quiet reflection for all of us. Because whether you carry the specific astrological signature or not, we all have to navigate the relentless noise of this world. We all have to figure out what to let in and what to filter out.
True power lies not in making the loudest noise, but in the quiet, disciplined reception of knowledge transforming the limping dwarf into the universal strider.
You spend your whole life trying to listen to what the world is telling you. But if you were to filter out every piece of gossip, every external expectation, every ambient anxiety, what is the great silence underneath actually asking you to do?